Welcome back to the Quarterly Call. All content is for informational purposes and is not investment advice. Please consult with an investment professional. Today, we are doing a deep dive into the source material that, frankly, is going to blow your mind.
Yeah, we have a really massive stack of recent financial and operational data to get through. It's from the second quarter of 2026.
Right, from the premier global supplier of semiconductor manufacturing equipment. And, our mission today is to figure out what their performance and their forecasts actually reveal about the whole global tech landscape.
Exactly. We're looking at the hidden infrastructure making artificial intelligence and advanced computing even possible.
Yeah, because whether you are actively tracking this whole AI boom, or maybe you're just curious about global tech supply chains, or honestly, if you just want to understand how the most complex machines on Earth are sold, this deep dive into the source material is your shortcut. You're going to walk away from this incredibly well-informed.
It's a fascinating subject. I mean, we're not just going to read you a spreadsheet today. We want to explore why these numbers are moving the way they are and what that signals for the next decade of technology.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because I want to set the stage for you first. Imagine a machine, and I mean a single machine the size of a public transit bus.
Oh, and weighing well over 100 tons, easily.
100 tons. And inside this absolute behemoth, there's a microscopic droplet of molten tin just falling through a vacuum.
It's a tiny drop.
Yeah. And as it falls, a high-powered carbon dioxide laser strikes that exact droplet. But not just once, it hits it twice.
Which is just wild to think about the precision there.
It's insane. The first laser pulse hits it and flattens the tin into this, like a pancake shape. And then the second pulse, which comes fractions of a second later, vaporizes that pancake into a plasma that is literally hotter than the surface of the sun.
It sounds like pure science fiction.
It really does. And that microscopic explosion emits a very specific wavelength of extreme ultraviolet light. And that light is collected by the smoothest mirrors ever created by human hands.
Yeah, the stat on those mirrors is always what gets me. They are so perfectly flat that if you scaled them up to the size of the Earth, the highest mountain would be less than a millimeter tall.
Less than a millimeter. And this whole explosive, mind-bending process happens 50,000 times every single second.
It's the literal physical reality of what it takes to manufacture the silicon powering the modern world. Without that exact process happening flawlessly, the AI revolution simply stops in its tracks.
So that's the machine we are talking about today. And the company that makes them just reported a massive blowout second quarter for 2026. They pulled in total net sales of 9.3 billion euros.
With a really strong gross margin, too, right around 54%.
Yeah, 54%.
Yeah.
And net income hit 2.9 billion euros. And that's even after accounting for their internal IT and tech transformation costs. But, the biggest surprise in this data wasn't the hardware sales.
No, it was the installed base management revenue, or IBM as they call it.
Exactly. The IBM revenue came in at 2.8 billion euros.
Yeah.
That is nearly 300 million higher than anyone expected. And it looks like this boom is largely driven by software-led upgrades.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is that this IBM figure is kind of the Rosetta Stone for understanding the current desperation in the global semiconductor market.
Desperation? How so?
Well, to really grasp why that gross margin sits so healthily at 54%, you have to look at a confluence of realities. First, you have incredibly high volumes of physical system sales, which provides what we call fixed cost leverage.
Meaning because they sell so many, the cost per unit goes down.
Exactly. When you're operating massive manufacturing facilities with thousands of specialized engineers, your baseline operating costs are astronomical. But if you push more volume through that same facility, you spread those fixed costs out. That naturally fattens your margins.
Makes sense.
Second, they had a highly favorable product mix. They're selling a significant ratio of their most advanced, highest margin machines. But the third factor, and this is the most dynamic one, is that unexpected surge in software upgrades you mentioned. They give customers instant productivity boosts without requiring new hardware or significant machine downtime.
Okay, I want to pause here because this software thing, it really reminds me of the modern electric vehicle market.
Oh, how so?
Well, if you own a high-end electric car today, you might go to sleep with a vehicle that does 0 to 60 in 4 seconds. But while you're sleeping, the manufacturer pushes an over-the-air software update.
Right, over the Wi-Fi.
Yeah. And you wake up, get in the car, and suddenly it does 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds. You didn't go to a mechanic. Nobody physically swapped out the motor. You literally just downloaded more performance overnight.
That's a remarkably accurate analogy,
So
actually.
that's what's happening with these multi-million-dollar lithography machines.
Basically, yes. When a foundry buys one of these machines, they're buying hardware with incredibly complex parameters. Over time, the manufacturer analyzes vast amounts of operational data from their entire global fleet.
So they learn how the machines operate in the wild.
Exactly. And they discover new algorithms to, say, optimize the mechanical movements or refine the laser pulsing or perfectly calibrate the wafer alignment stages. They bundle all those optimizations into a software package and just sell it to the customer.
Oh, wow. And that software gives them an instant yield improvement.
Instant. A yield or throughput boost, all without the grueling process of installing new hardware. And for the supplier, these are incredibly profitable transactions. I mean, the margin on a software sale is inherently different and much higher than the margin on sourcing, assembling, and shipping thousands of pounds of metal and glass.
Obviously, it's just code.
Yeah,
But wait, if I'm the CFO of a major semiconductor foundry, my capital expenditure budget is massive, but it's not infinite.
sure.
So if I can just write a check to download a software upgrade and squeeze, I don't know, 20% more chips out of my existing machines, doesn't that cannibalize the sale of new physical machines?
You would think so, right?
Yeah. I mean, why would I buy a brand new $100 million bus if I can just download an update to make my current bus fit more passengers?
What's fascinating here is that in almost any other traditional capital equipment industry like commercial aviation or heavy construction, your skepticism would be spot on. You would absolutely expect a direct cannibalization effect.
Right, because extending the life of the old stuff delays the new stuff.
Exactly. But the market dynamics we are observing in the semiconductor space right now are completely unprecedented. We are not in an either environment. We are firmly in an and situation.
An and situation, so they're buying both.
Both. The global demand for computing power, catalyzed specifically by generative artificial intelligence, is so intense that semiconductor manufacturers are utterly desperate for capacity. They are leaving no stone unturned,
So they max out the existing tools with the software upgrades.
while simultaneously ordering brand new physical machines. They are eagerly purchasing these software upgrades to squeeze every last drop of productivity out of their existing installed base because it's a rapid tourniquet for their capacity bleed.
Ah, so the software upgrade is the painkiller today, while the new machine orders are the actual long-term surgery they're waiting for.
Precisely. They literally have to do both simultaneously just to keep their heads above water, and they have the capital to do it because the alternative is an existential threat to these companies. If they can't print enough silicon, they miss the AI wave entirely.
Wow. Okay, so if they are buying every upgrade and every new machine they can get their hands on, it really begs the question, who exactly is driving this insatiable demand? Where are all these chips going?
Well, the data shows that net system sales were split almost perfectly down the middle. 51% went to logic chip makers and 49% went to memory chip makers.
That's pretty even split. Let's talk about the memory side first, because the forecast in the source material for memory is just wild.
It is. Memory revenue is forecasted to explode by a staggering 75% in 2027.
75%. That's massive. And the data explicitly states this is fueled by the need for advanced DDR memory and high bandwidth memory, which they call HBM.
Right, HBM.
It also says this is leading to higher lithography intensity. Now, memory chips used to be this notoriously cyclical, almost commoditized market, right? Like just cheap storage you threw into a PC. Is this 75% jump a permanent structural shift or just a temporary panic buy for AI?
It's a fundamental architectural shift. And to understand why, we really need to break down that phrase you just used, lithography intensity.
Okay, let's unpack it.
Historically, you're right. Memory chips, particularly DRAM, were relatively straightforward compared to the highly complex logic processors doing the actual math. But the architecture of memory has completely transformed to serve AI. When we talk about HBM, high bandwidth memory, we are no longer just printing a flat two-dimensional chip.
Right, it's 3D now.
Exactly. Think of traditional memory like a sprawling suburban neighborhood. It takes up a lot of physical area, and getting data from one side of the neighborhood to the other takes time.
Because the data has to travel across the chip.
Exactly. HBM takes that suburban neighborhood and turns it into a towering skyscraper in the middle of a dense city. You are printing multiple, incredibly thin layers of memory and stacking them vertically on top of each other.
Okay, so instead of the data having to drive across town, it just takes the elevator up one floor.
That is a perfect analogy, and those microscopic elevators are called through-silicon vias, or TSVs. They're these vertical channels that pass perfectly straight down through the multiple layers of silicon to connect them.
Oh, I see.
But here's the catch. To build that skyscraper, the alignment of every single floor has to be flawless. If the elevator shaft on floor 4 doesn't perfectly align with the shaft on floor 5, the entire chip is dead.
Yikes. So there's zero margin for error.
Zero. And because this architecture is so intensely three-dimensional and complex, you literally need more machine passes per silicon wafer. A single wafer has to go into these massive lithography machines, those deep UV immersion and extreme UV tools over and over and over again.
Ah, so that is what increasing lithography intensity means.
Exactly. The recipe for making the chip now requires the machine to do vastly more work. So even if a memory manufacturer wanted to produce the exact same physical volume of silicon wafers this year as they did last year, they would still need to buy more lithography machines.
Because each wafer is spending more time hogging the machine.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. You have memory exploding at 75%, but you also have logic foundry revenue slated to grow by about 25% this year, with furious demand at the 5 nanometer, 4 nanometer, and 3 nanometer nodes.
An aggressive acceleration toward 2 nanometer and even 1.4 nanometer.
Right. So when you look at those two pillars, logic and memory, you realize that AI is the invisible hand pushing both of them. It's a totally symbiotic relationship.
It really is. They need each other.
AI needs brilliant logic processors to do the math. They're the actual brains. But those brains starve if they don't have lightning-fast memory to feed them data.
Right. If the memory is slow, the logic processor just sits there twiddling its thumbs, wasting immense amounts of energy while waiting for the next batch of data to process.
So they have to scale up together.
That symbiosis is exactly right. And I'd ask you to really just imagine the physical footprint required to build the chips for the apps you use every day. Every time you generate an image on your phone using AI or a corporation trains a new language model, it sends a demand signal all the way down a massive global supply chain.
And the whole supply chain is just racing to keep up.
Racing. You need thousands of logic chips paired with thousands of HBM chips. To make those, you need vast new fabrication facilities. And to equip those facilities, you need hundreds of these ultra-complex lithography tools. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars being mobilized globally.
It's just the scale of it is hard to wrap your head around. But making these incredibly complex chips isn't just about printing them right. It's about making sure they actually work.
Yes. Printing a 2 nanometer logic chip or a 12-layer HBM stack is only half the battle. If a single microscopic dust particle lands on that wafer, or if the alignment is off by just a few atoms, you've just burned millions of dollars of raw material and machine time.
Which brings us to a lesser-known but equally vital world in this data, metrology. This is basically the quality control department, right?
Exactly. And the data highlights a massive 25% growth forecast for 2026 in metrology and inspection tools, specifically optical and e-beam technologies.
25% growth just for the tools that check the work.
Yeah, they are seeing huge demand.
Now, before we get into the tech of how they actually inspect these things, there is a geographic data point in the source material that really stands out. Regionally, China remains a steadfast 20% of total sales for 2026.
Right. And because the total revenue pie for the company is growing significantly, maintaining that 20% share means the actual volume going to China is increasing in sync with the global baseline.
And the data indicates this is primarily catering to domestic logic demand within China.
Yes. And it's important to look at that geographic data objectively. The Chinese domestic market is heavily focused on building self-sufficiency, particularly in mature and mid-tier logic chips. Those are heavily used in automotive, industrial, and consumer electronics.
Right, so it scales proportionally with the rest of the world.
Exactly. It mirrors the expansion we're seeing globally as every single region attempts to secure and domesticate its own silicon supply chain to prevent future bottlenecks.
Okay, so back to that 25% growth in metrology and inspection. Why is checking the work suddenly becoming such a massive growth vector? Because, I mean, when I think of checking a silicon wafer, I think of like a proofreader at a printing press.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Back when you were printing, say, large font children's books, the proofreader could just casually skim the pages. If a single letter had a slight smudge, it wasn't the end of the world. The reader could still read the story.
Right, the margin for error was pretty wide.
But today, the semiconductor industry isn't printing children's books. They're essentially printing the entire Encyclopedia Britannica on a single grain of rice.
Yeah, that's exactly what they're doing.
You can't just skim that. But here's my question. Every second a wafer spends sitting inside an inspection machine is a second it isn't moving down the manufacturing line being printed. Is there a point where inspecting the chip takes longer than actually making it?
You have hit on the central, brutal tension of modern semiconductor manufacturing. It's this unforgiving trade-off between speed and accuracy.
Between throughput and yield.
Exactly. And this is exactly why we are seeing a 25% growth in these advanced metrology tools. As you move from a 5 nanometer process down to a 2 nanometer level, the margin for error effectively vanishes. We are talking about manufacturing at the atomic scale.
So even the tiniest speck of dust.
A tiny variance in the polishing environment, a microscopic particle, or even slight thermal expansion in the silicon can completely destroy the functionality of the chip. In the past, foundries might have relied more heavily on end-of-line testing, waiting until the chip was mostly finished to see if it worked.
But with the increased lithography intensity you were talking about earlier, that means if you wait until the end, you've wasted weeks of machine time on a wafer that was doomed on day one.
Precisely. The cost of a ruined wafer is astronomically high now. If a defect is introduced at step 10, but you don't catch it until step 50, you have just wasted the operational capacity of 40 subsequent manufacturing steps.
And these machines are too expensive to be wasting time on broken chips.
Exactly. Customers simply cannot afford to mass-produce defective, highly expensive silicon, so they're forced to implement vastly more process control. They have to measure and inspect the wafer at multiple intermediate steps throughout the manufacturing process.
And the data mentioned two technologies for this. Optical and E-beam. What's the difference?
Well, optical inspection uses light, and it is very fast. It can scan a wafer quickly, but it's limited by the physical wavelength of light. It struggles to resolve the absolute smallest atomic defects.
Because the light wave is literally too big to see the tiny defect.
Right. E-beam, or electron beam inspection, uses electrons instead of photons. Electrons have a much smaller wavelength, so an E-beam tool can see incredibly tiny sub-nanometer defects. But scanning a whole wafer with an electron beam is fundamentally slower.
Ah, so there's that tension again. Speed versus accuracy.
Exactly. And the industry is throwing immense capital at bridging this gap, trying to make E-beam faster and optical more precise. These inspection tools are becoming non-negotiable investments rather than afterthoughts. If you don't have state-of-the-art metrology, you cannot achieve a viable yield on a 2 nanometer process.
Which completely ruins the economics of the entire multi-billion-dollar factory.
Exactly.
So while checking the chips is obviously vital, I think we can pivot here, because the true marvels of engineering the rock stars of this industry are the machines doing the actual printing. Let's look at the hardware fleet forecast for 2026.
The numbers here are pretty staggering.
They really are. For 2026, the company expects to ship around 130 DUV immersion systems. That's deep ultraviolet. And that is a re-acceleration to match last year's high output. They're also seeing major traction with new customers for their DUV dry tools.
Yeah, DUV is still the workhorse for a huge portion of the industry.
But then we move to the EUV fleet, extreme ultraviolet. They expect to ship around 65 low NA EUV machines. And it's interesting, the data notes that this fleet is transitioning between models right now. They're moving from the E tool to the F tool.
Which will historically benefit gross margins as the new platform matures.
Right. But the crown jewel of this entire operation is High NA EUV. The data shows this next-generation technology is showing great maturity. Intel Foundry is already using High NA technology on their Intel 18A process node to produce a subset of their core Ultra Series 3 processor.
That's a huge milestone.
It is. But we throw around terms like low NA and high NA all the time. What does that actually mean mechanically?
Let's break down the physics, because the transition to High NA EUV is arguably the most significant technological inflection point in the industry right now. NA stands for numerical aperture. It's a fundamental concept in optics.
Like in a camera lens.
Exactly like a camera lens. A lens with a wider aperture, a lower f-stop, can capture a wider angle of light rays. In lithography, the optical system projects a microscopic pattern onto the silicon wafer. A higher numerical aperture means the optical system can collect and focus light from a wider variety of angles.
And why is capturing light from wider angles better?
Because when you do that, you can achieve a much sharper, finer focus at the exact point of impact. In technical terms, it increases the resolving power of the system.
So it's basically the difference between drawing with a thick, blunt marker versus a hyperfine-tipped pen.
That's a great way to visualize it. For the last few years, the industry has relied on low NA EUV systems, which have a numerical aperture of 0.33. Those machines are incredible, but as chip designs shrink down to 2 nanometers and beyond, even the 0.33 NA systems struggle to print the smallest features in a single pass.
Because the marker is too blunt.
Right, so the manufacturers have to use a technique called multi-patterning.
Oh, let me guess. Multi-patterning is like trying to paint a highly detailed, intricate portrait, but you only have that thick, blunt marker, so you have to use multiple stencils, and you carefully paint over the same exact spot 2 or 3 times to eventually carve out the fine edges you need.
You nailed it. You print a loose pattern, then you shift the wafer slightly, and you print another loose pattern overlapping it. You use the intersection of the 2 patterns to create a smaller feature.
That sounds incredibly tedious.
It works, but it is incredibly time-consuming. It massively increases the risk of alignment defects, and it eats up valuable machine capacity. So high NA EUV increases the numerical aperture to 0.55. It gives them the hyperfine tipped pen.
So they don't have to do the multi-patterning anymore.
Exactly. With high NA, the foundry can print those incredibly dense, microscopic features in a single pass.
Wow. And that single pass must be a massive economic game changer.
It's the entire point.
Yeah.
For years, high NA has been discussed almost theoretically like a brilliant, multi-billion-dollar science experiment happening in R&D labs. But what this data clearly indicates is that high NA is now entering a true production environment.
Like with Intel.
Right. The integration into Intel's 18A process is a massive milestone for demonstrating readiness. But I want to emphasize the economic crossover point here. A technology like high NA doesn't get adopted just because it's a cool scientific achievement. It gets adopted when it makes economic sense.
When it's cheaper than the old way.
Exactly. High NA becomes commercially viable the exact moment its platform maturity allows it to produce chips more cost-effectively than older technologies. Once the high NA tool is reliable and fast enough, that single pass becomes cheaper and much faster than the complex multi-patterning steps on the older low NA tools.
So what does this all mean in practical logistical terms? Because it's very easy for us to sit here, read a data sheet, and say, oh, they'll ship 65 EUV machines this year. We treat it like they're shipping 65 laptops in cardboard boxes.
Right, it's just a number on a page.
But we have to contextualize this scale for you.
Yes.
Earlier, I mentioned one of these EUV machines is roughly the size of a public transit bus and weighs over 100 tons. But it's worse than that. It's assembled from hundreds of thousands of individual parts, sourced from a massive global supply chain.
Highly specialized vendors.
Yeah. And you can't just put a fully assembled EUV machine on a standard cargo ship, subject it to the rocking of the ocean and the salty air, and hope for the best.
Definitely not.
To transport just one of these systems to a customer requires it to be carefully disassembled into massive modules, loaded onto multiple Boeing 747 cargo planes, flown across the world, and then painstakingly reassembled in a hyper-clean, vibration-isolated environment.
It's a logistical miracle, frankly.
The ballet required to manufacture, test, disassemble, ship, and then reassemble 65 of these behemoths across the globe in a single year is almost beyond comprehension.
It really is, and it highlights why the tactical transitions between tool models are so meticulously managed. You mentioned the data showing a transition from the E model to the F model in the low NA systems.
Right. What does that transition actually entail?
Well, product life cycles in this industry are carefully choreographed dances. When you introduce a new model, like the F tool, it initially costs more to produce. The supply chain has to adapt to new parts, manufacturing processes are ironed out, and the time it takes to assemble the first few units is naturally longer.
So the margins take a hit initially.
Exactly. So as that platform matures, engineers find efficiencies, the supply chain scales, and the gross margin on that specific tool improves. The company has to manage these transitions across their fleet to maximize customer productivity, giving them the faster, better tool while protecting their own supplier gross margins.
The fact that they can execute a model transition across a fleet of 65 ultra-precision bus-sized machines while maintaining a 54% overall gross margin, it speaks volumes about their operational control.
It shows total supply chain mastery.
It's genuinely incredible. But if we are marveling at the current production numbers, shipping 130 DUV systems and 65 EUV systems this year, it pushes us toward the ultimate forward-looking question. The data notes that demand visibility for this equipment is now stretching years into the future.
It's years into the late 2020s.
Right. So if you are this supplier and your customers, who are the biggest tech companies on Earth, are essentially signaling, we will buy everything you can possibly make for the rest of the decade, How on earth do you physically scale up to build even more of these behemoths?
You have to look at their future guidance and operations.
Let's do that. For the full year 2026, they upgraded their guidance to a massive 43 billion to 35 billion euros in total net sales, keeping those gross margins between 54 and 56%. Q3 alone is expected to bring in 11 to 12 billion euros.
It's a tsunami of future demand.
It is. And to meet it, the company is actively investigating 30% capacity increases for both their EUV and immersion tools for 2027. And then another 30% jump on top of that for 2028.
Yeah, 30% year over year is staggering for physical manufacturing.
And they are achieving this near-term capacity growth by continuously increasing what they call their internal move rate, quarter over quarter within their existing parameters. They are breaking ground on a brand new campus this year, but the data says that new facility won't actually impact their capacity until beyond 2028.
Right, they have to maximize what they have right now.
But here is a fascinating detail from the source material. There is a major industry bottleneck right now regarding customer cleanroom space. In 2026, the physical space to put these machines is constrained.
Yes, very constrained.
But this is expected to shift as new greenfield fabs, brand new, from-scratch factory facilities open their doors in 2027 and 2028. How does that dynamic work?
Well, the dynamic between equipment supply and clean room space is the ultimate physical bottleneck of the entire semiconductor industry. It honestly doesn't matter if the supplier can miraculously produce 200 EUV machines tomorrow. You cannot sell a machine if the customer doesn't have a specialized hyper-clean room to put it in.
Because these aren't just regular warehouses.
Not at all. Building a modern semiconductor fab is a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar construction project. These buildings require massive amounts of concrete, specialized vibration isolation pads, miles of ultra-pure water piping, and immense electrical substations.
And you mentioned earlier that throughout 2025 and 2026, the industry has basically been running out of floor space.
They are out of space, but as you noted, a massive global wave of new factory construction is nearing completion in 2027 and 2028.
Heavily subsidized by various government acts globally, right?
Yes. And when those greenfield fabs finally open, it will instantly unlock a colossal amount of physical capacity for new equipment. The suppliers plan to increase their manufacturing capacity by 30% in 2027 and 2028 is perfectly timed to meet this incoming wave of available clean room floor space.
I understand the timing, but this leads me to a critical point about financial risk. It's like buying massive, custom-built million-dollar furniture for a house that hasn't finished being framed yet.
That's a very apt way to look at it.
The supplier is preemptively planning 30% capacity increases for 2027 and another 30% for 2028, largely based on these demand signals and the anticipated construction of these new fabs. But they are making these massive internal investments to expand their own supply chain before all the formal, harding purchase orders from the customers are fully signed. Isn't this supplier taking a massive multi-billion-dollar gamble? I mean, what if the AI boom cools off? Or what if the greenfield fabs delay their openings due to construction issues? This supplier could be left holding the bag with vastly expanded factories and no one to buy the machines.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to understand the unique nature of this specific market. It is hyper-consolidated. We are not talking about consumer electronics, where millions of individuals might arbitrarily change their minds about a trendy product next year.
Right. These aren't smartphones.
Exactly. We are talking about a handful of the largest, most well-capitalized technology and manufacturing companies on Earth, making decade-long strategic bets. When these giant clients send demand signals indicating they need more capacity for 2028, those signals are highly reliable indicators.
Even if the formal purchase order hasn't cleared corporate procurement yet.
Even then, the supplier has modeled the scenarios and calculated that the risk of undershipping, the risk of literally starving the AI revolution of the hardware it needs to exist, and permanently damaging their relationships with key customers is far, far greater than the risk of slight overcapacity. If they wait for the final ironclad purchase orders to start expanding their own factories, they will be years too late, and the entire global tech roadmap would stall.
So the biggest risk isn't building too much. The biggest risk is becoming the bottleneck that chokes the golden goose of artificial intelligence.
Exactly.
That is just a wild paradigm to operate under. This has been an incredibly dense amount of information to process today. We set out to understand what this second quarter data revealed about the global tech landscape, and the picture that has emerged is one of absolute relentless physics-defying acceleration.
It really is an unprecedented infrastructure supercycle.
From the software upgrades pulling immediate productivity out of existing machines, to the architectural shift toward high-bandwidth memory skyscrapers, to the logistical miracles of shipping bus-sized EUV tools across the globe. It's abundantly clear. The numbers are astronomical, the engineering operates at the literal boundaries of atomic physics, and the physical scale of the supply chain required to pull this off is awe-inspiring.
We are watching the foundation of the next 50 years of human technology being laid in real time.
1 nanometer at a time.
It truly is a paradigm-shifting moment in industrial history. We are watching humanity manipulate the atomic structure of silicon with light at a scale and speed that was considered impossible just a decade ago.
It's incredible.
But as we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over, something that pushes beyond the physical machines we've discussed today.
Oh, I'm intrigued. Let's hear it.
We spend a lot of time analyzing how software is magically unlocking hardware capacity right now, squeezing more out of the existing fleet. But looking ahead to 2030 and beyond, could we see a future where semiconductor manufacturing tools become heavily virtualized?
Virtualized. How would that work?
Well, as artificial intelligence becomes exponentially more powerful, fueled by the very chips these machines make, could it one day simulate the incredibly complex physics of the lithography process so perfectly in a digital twin that physical testing and metrology are reduced to a tiny fraction of what they are today?
Wait, really? Just simulate the whole thing?
Think about it. If AI software can completely model the atomic behavior of the silicon, the fluid dynamics of the photoresist, and the thermal expansion of the wafer before a single machine is ever turned on, it could entirely upend how these manufacturing giants build their business models.
Oh, wow. So machine building a chip to run an AI, to simulate a better machine, to build a better chip.
It is the ultimate feedback loop.
That is fascinating. Thank you so much for tuning into the Quarterly Call. For more episodes, please remember to rate and follow our show. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.